What's up, guys, and welcome back to the doctor's office. I am sick, but I needed to get this video out ASAP, so ignore the sickness. So again, I am Dr. K. Roy Knight, here to give you your proper diagnosis and prognosis and everything comics and comic book characters. And we're gonna do this before I run out of breath, okay? Now, we all know that I've been keeping you guys up to date on everything happening with the Blood Hunt and the Blood Hunt tie-ins. We are now at Blood Hunt number 4. And when I tell you guys, what I was screaming, I don't really have a voice, so my screams were silent, but I was still physically screaming at fucking plot twist after plot twist, okay? But what I'm gonna do is give you guys a rundown of Black Panther Blood Hunt 2 because it is probably the most important one. And it gives you just like the insights of like what the hell is going on in Blood Hunt number 4. Now in Black Panther number 2, we see T'Challa is where he was after the first one, where he had went and it basically exiled himself, and he was in like the sanctuary where they keep panthers, and that's where he was. And he ends up meeting Bast in person, and she's like, you know what, it's time we have a conversation. So she's talking to him about what happened eons ago with the first vampire, Varney. Now Varney was trying to do where he would ascend to being a god, but the gods weren't having it. And while he was out in the place which would later become Wakanda, there was no claim on this land by literally any god. So Varney was basically doing whatever the fuck he wanted to do. And the people there were praying to Khonshu for help, crazily enough. And Khonshu was ready to throw hands for these people, but Bast was like, no. Basically because this place is unclaimed. If you do something here, it could literally upset the balance of anything. So we need to talk to the other gods to make sure that like it's fine. But as we all know, Khonshu don't give a fuck about no talking. He's all about action, period. But he's like, you know, you're right. Let's go talk to them. And the gods were like, he gotta go. Varney gotta get the fuck out of here. So they were trying to enact a plan, and the god of war, I think he's the African god of war, was like, oh, I'm joining too. And Khonshu was like, are you sure? Because if you do that, that's basically like enacting an act of war. And he was like, I don't give a fuck. Varney must go. Like, he gotta go, period. So at this point, all of the gods are in agreement that Varney must go. And so back to the present, where Bast is talking to T'Challa. She calls him the last of the first, which is what Blade had called him previously. And she was like, because your line was the first here in Wakanda, and like your line specifically is the last of it. So she calls for Anaket, and Anaket comes out of the water, and she's like, I need you to take him down to the temple of the first blasphemy because it has to be destroyed. And she was like, oh, like I told you bitches to do forever ago. I've been told y'all to destroy that. She was like, listen, we know, but he's got to do it, so take him down there. And so it kind of just does a back and forth to where the gods were going up against the vampires and Varney, and then they had drowned the first blasphemy temple and everything like that. And so she takes him down to the Forbidden Waters where the temple actually is. And she ends up biting her lip to make it bleed, and she gives him some of her blood. Now, this is super significant because the heart-shaped herb has been working very, very hard to keep T'Challa in control of his body and his mind. And as I said previously, he's trying real hard to resist Blade, like real hard. And so she gives him some more blood, and it gives him more clarity and more power, which is very, very helpful. So at the end of all of that, when he gets to the waters, after he's like realizing that he now has two gods like pulling his soul out of the depths of hell at this point, he comes across the Atlanteans, who tell him, you need to get the fuck out of here. And that brings us to Blood Hunt 4. Okay, now the first blasphemy temple is sitting in Central Park now, and Blade is like all ecstatic and just talking about how his plan has been going the way it needed to go and all of this other stuff. And T'Challa is like asking these questions, and he's just like, finally he's just like, you're not even Blade, are you? And he's like, he turns around and is like, no, I'm not. I'm fucking Vernay. And I'm gonna get to this in a second. Now, in the meantime, Doctor Strange and Clea have gone to go talk to Dr. Doom, which, you know, they're talking to him and they're like, your borders are protected. And he was like, yeah, of course, because I prepped for all of this. He was like, it's kind of obvious when you think about it. Like, when you really start to think about it, all the things that have been going on is pretty obvious. And I'm just sitting here like, what the fuck? He says, I'm perfectly willing to assist you in what it is that you need to do. And he's like, but, you know, he's like, but we need like a crap ton of mages and like, you know, supernatural magical creatures. And he's like, I mean, I have plenty of like those. Doctor Strange's like, I have plenty of those. Like, I can pull those at any time. He's like, oh, don't worry about it. I went and got like your entire class from Strange Academy. And he was like, huh? But that happened when he showed up in the Strange Academy too. But he says that the ultimate thing that he really needs at this point is to become Sorcerer Supreme. I said this is a whole setup. Simultaneously, as Blade is monologuing and Dr. Doom is trying to set Strange up in some weirdly shape or form about becoming Sorcerer Supreme, Huntress Moon and Tigra are at the Asgardian prison. Now, Khonshu had been imprisoned in Asgard, in an Asgardian prison a little while back. And they go to get him out. And like I told you guys before, they're also going to go get that undead Moon Knight army that they used against the Zodiac, because that army cannot be turned into vampires or anything like that. So they went to go do that. And they brought Wrecker. Interestingly enough, because Wrecker has an Asgardian tool to break open the Asgardian prison. And so they do that. And while Vernay is monologuing, talking about being the unliving dark force and like absorbing the dark force energy or whatever the fuck he's got going on, Black Panther's like, so you're gonna be like this all-powerful thing or whatnot? And he's like, yeah, of course. And he's like, well, then what's that? And the moon is shining mad bright. And he's like, what the fuck is that? And of course, the undead army of Moon Knights is coming that way, being led by none other than Moon Knight. That is where I screamed. So as that's happening, he has the blood, because of course they were basically milking Thor for blood. So he's like got Thor's blood in his hand and he's like drinking that and all kinds of stuff going on. And T'Challa has one of Damascene's like stakes in his hand, and he gets caught by Blade, and he's like, oh, did you really think that it would be that easy? He was like, oh, I wasn't doing anything in particular with this. I was actually just removing it. And then Thor, who wasn't dead, just not moving, comes back to us. And Thor is just like, you know, you've insulted me, you've injured me, and I will have my revenge for that. And the Avengers show up and they're just like, and that's just fancy talk for avenging. I'm like, the screaming. And Blade's just like, let's go. Listen, I was very, very happy with this book. So I want to kind of just like explain a few things, because I know some people who don't actually know who Varney is, and so I know some people just looking at some of the comments for it were a little confused in terms of Varney. So Varney is the first vampire, period. Right? Dracula's blood comes directly from Varney. So when Dracula was turned, it was by Varney's blood. Now, Dr. Doom said that the first time that Blade went up against Varney, because this is not the first time that Varney has showed up at all, they actually ended up going up against him, Dracula, and a few other people from the Midnight Suns had ended up going up against Varney, and a couple of people had died. I think Frank Drake is one of them that had died going up against Varney the last time. And the first time he tried to like turn Blade, it did not work, right? So he says that a second time would have had to occur. So I kept saying that the Adana definitely had something to do with this, and I'm not even wrong. So I really want to say that the Adana was more of a setup for the second time, so that Varney could get into Blade's blood and make him his vessel. Apparently the whole entire situation with the Adana and anything that had come prior to made Blade the perfect vessel. So if you remember from all of the back reading that I did, that he had gone up against the Adana and he was getting his ass beat so bad that he ended up having to go to Dracula for help. Okay, so when he went to Dracula, Dracula was like, you have to fight like a monster. You have to be the monster that you are in order to defeat this person. And so he said, but in order to do that, you're gonna have to take a drink from me. Blade was so against that, but he needed this because the world was literally going to end. And so he drank Dracula's blood, which incidentally is also Varney's blood. So that whole situation was essentially a setup, whether directly or indirectly, by Varney to turn Blade into this perfect vessel, which was him drinking Dracula's blood. So whatever catalyst needed to happen in order for him to get blood that is concurrent with Varney's blood, aka Dracula's blood. Now, whether or not Dracula had anything to do with that, I highly doubt that. I don't think that he knew that. I don't think he knew that that would happen at all. I truly don't think that he knew that was going to happen. Did he prepare for something like this? Yes. You always have to stay prepared when it comes to vampires, and that's kind of what Dr. Doom was saying. But I don't think that Dracula was just like, later on he's going to try to take over the world. Yes, I don't think that at all. With that being said, the whole situation with like Victoria Montesi and going, not even just Victoria Montesi, but the Midnight Suns, Victoria, Tulip, Johnny, and Danny, are all like, they just went up against Blade in the tie-in. If you saw that video, in the tie-in, they go to Chicago Med and Blade kind of shows up, but he ends up leaving when Johnny opens fire, and like he just turns into like a thing of bats and kind of just leaves. He also ends up showing up to Brielle in that Dracula tie-in. So it's definite, and as I was saying before, the way he was talking, it was not Blade. Blade does not use these fucking words. He doesn't talk in these weird ass like old English sentences, and I just felt from the beginning that it wasn't him, but he still had like the same speech pattern as the Adana, and so that's why I was thinking that it could have been her or some like possessed by somebody like her. But for it to be Varney, 100% makes sense, especially considering the background between Varney and the other gods, including Bast. Now, the thing with Khonshu, I think, is absolutely hilarious because, like, his real problem was never any of the other gods. It was only ever Khonshu. So for them to immediately go to Khonshu and be like, we need you now, like, because they could have simply went and got that undead army of Moon Knights. They didn't have to get anybody else, but they got Moon Knight back. Like, he died a while ago. They got him back specifically after talking to Khonshu and getting Khonshu out of there. You know what I'm saying? So I just think that Varney's real issue is Khonshu and nobody else. 10 out of 10 on this story. 10 out of fucking 10. We don't get part 5 for a pretty good while. It is the absolute last book to come out in this. So the rest of it is literally just going to be tie-ins up until the very last book. But 10 out of 10 on this book. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I'm telling you, when I saw Moon Knight show up on the page screaming, even though it was silent because I didn't have a voice, screaming, I almost like choked. But I will be back, of course, with all of the other things, and later on, after this is all finished, I'm gonna try to put it in chronological order because I know it's out of order right now, but I'm gonna try to put it in chronological order for you guys so that when you guys are reading it, or if you haven't read it yet and kind of just like been keeping up with what I'm talking about, so when you guys get a chance to read it, you can read it in order. But that is it for this episode of The Doctor's Office, and I will see you guys next time.